All right, so today we're going back to ancient Egypt.
Always a good place to visit.
I think we all have that picture in our heads. Like you say, King Tut's tomb, you think gold, you think like all the treasures, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The riches, the kind of grandeur of it all. Yeah,
But today, we're kind of flipping that on its head.
that's right. Yeah.
Because what if I told you that maybe some of the most important clues to understanding this pharaoh, this boy king, and how he was buried and what it all meant?
Mhm.
What if those clues were hiding in plain sight the whole time?
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing to think that there's still so much we can learn from a
Yeah,
discovery that
that's true. Yeah.
happened, you know, over 100 years ago
Yeah.
now.
It's exactly back in 1922 when Howard Carter first opened that tomb. I mean, can you imagine being there, like seeing all that for the first
Oh,
time?
it must have been mind-blowing, truly.
But there's this new study by Dr. Nicholas Brown, an Egyptologist at Yale, who's arguing that it's time to look beyond, the flash
Hmm.
and really focus on these, what he calls humble artifacts, the everyday stuff that might have been overlooked.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the spectacular finds, but sometimes the real insights are in the seemingly mundane objects, right?
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. So
Yeah.
we're looking specifically at his interpretation of these clay trays and wooden staffs
Okay.
that were found in the tomb
Okay.
to try to understand what they tell us about ancient Egyptian
Oh,
religious
mm.
practices
Mhm.
and maybe even, Tutankhamun's own beliefs about the afterlife.
Sounds
Oh.
fascinating.
Amazing.
Let's dive in.
So starting with these clay trays.
Right.
Now, when archaeologists first, came across these things in the tomb, they probably thought, these were just, functional stands to put stuff on, right?
Yeah, probably just like utilitarian objects. You wouldn't think twice about them.
But Dr. Brown suggests that we need to see them differently.
Okay. How so?
He thinks that these trays, which were made from Nile mud,
Mm-hmm.
weren't just
Um.
for holding things, but were actually used for libations,
Libations.
meaning ritual offerings of water, and not just any water, but specifically water from the Nile.
Ah, so the source of the water itself had significance.
Huge significance
Okay.
because in ancient Egypt, the Nile was everything. It was life. It was renewal. It was this incredibly sacred force.
Right. So these offerings, these libations, they weren't just like, practical. They were deeply symbolic acts.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. You're offering this pure, life-giving water to the gods,
Mm.
to the deceased pharaoh. It's a way of honoring them, of showing respect.
And maybe even helping them in their journey through the afterlife, right?
Exactly.
very
It was
interesting.
believed that the water could help in this process of rebirth and rejuvenation.
So even the simplest element of the burial was infused with meaning.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah,
And it makes you think about, how we might misinterpret things if we don't understand the cultural context, the
Yeah.
belief system.
Totally. So what about the wooden staffs? I'm curious about those.
Yeah, those are really interesting too. So these staffs were found specifically near Tutankhamun's head
Okay.
in the tomb.
Okay, so obviously placed there deliberately.
And Dr. Brown proposes that they were actually essential tools in a ritual awakening of the pharaoh in the afterlife.
A ritual awakening. I
Yeah.
haven't heard of that before.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So it ties back to this central Egyptian myth, the myth of Osiris, the god of the underworld.
Okay, right. I know Osiris. He's a big deal.
And according to some beliefs, Osiris was brought back to life with the help of staffs that were held behind his head.
Oh, wow. So they're kind of like jump-starting
yeah,
him back to
that's
life.
Yeah, exactly. And so Dr. Brown suggests that the placement of these staffs in Tutankhamun's tomb was a deliberate echo of that myth.
Oh, that's a really interesting connection.
It's like they were
Commented,
saying,
commented.
okay, we're going to perform the same ritual. We're going to use these staffs to help awaken Tutankhamun in the afterlife, just like they did for Osiris.
And this could be a sign of how important the Osiris myth was to them.
Absolutely central to their whole belief system. And what's even more interesting is that Tutankhamun, we always call him the boy king because his reign was so short.
Right. He died really young.
And so the fact that this particular arrangement of staffs appears in his tomb suggests that maybe this was a period where these funerary practices were evolving.
Oh, so maybe he was kind of a pioneer in this sense.
Potentially. I mean, it's hard to say for sure, but it raises all these questions about how religious rituals might have been changing and developing during that time.
That's so cool. I love how these seemingly insignificant objects can open up these huge questions about history and belief.
It's like these clay trays and these wooden staffs. They're not just random objects. They're these little windows into this incredibly rich and complex spiritual world.
They become like
Mm.
puzzle pieces, helping us understand the bigger picture.
And it really just shows you that, even with something as well studied as Tutankhamun's tomb, There's always more to discover, always new ways of looking at the evidence.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that
That's
history
right.
is never really settled. There are always new interpretations, new
Yeah,
perspectives waiting to
exactly.
be uncovered.
It makes you wonder, like, thousands of years from now, what will archaeologists think when they dig up our stuff?
Oh man, I can't
It's
even
impossible.
imagine what they'll make of our iPhones and smartwatches.
They'll probably come up with all sorts of crazy theories.
Right, like maybe they'll think our earbuds were some kind of ancient communication device for talking to the gods.
Or that our selfie sticks were scepters of power.
Exactly. It's a fun thought experiment to imagine how future generations will interpret the everyday objects that we take for granted.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive, but as always, leaves you with something to ponder.
Definitely keeps those brain gears turning.
Thanks for joining us.
Anytime, it's been a pleasure.